Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Pan Future Society podcast. I am your host, Sean, and today is Saturday, June 24th, 2017. I guess I don't really have any particular rant or ramble to start off with today, except for this. I guess I can roll with this one. My short news stories today both come from China, and they're not the only science stories I could have brought you from China this week. So at least take that also in addition to the very cool science news that it is. If you live in the United States, take that as a sign that your country does not spend enough money on scientific research. Possibly if you live in France or Denmark or Germany or probably just about anywhere in Europe or Japan or India or Australia, your country probably spends a good deal of money on science research and gets stuff done. Clearly, China has a lot of resources, both in money and people power, and they are making some huge steps forward in research areas. And let that be a warning for my listeners in the United States. If we don't pressure our elected officials to properly fund science, we're going to fall behind, and we're going to fall way behind and become not one of the leading nations in the world in the areas of science, and we will not enjoy all the benefits that scientific progress can bring. So anyway, let's get to that news of the moment. First news item this week, China has begun construction of the first of 8 large-scale carbon capture and storage plants in efforts to reduce their carbon footprint. China is one of the largest producers of greenhouse gases on the planet, and they are putting their resources behind efforts to curtail that. The Yangcheng Integrated Carbon Capture and Storage Project, located in the Shanxi province, will be their first facility that turns carbon dioxide into some form that they can store. Once operational, it says that they will be able to capture 400,000 to 800,000 tons of CO2 per year, about the equivalent of taking 80,000 cars off the streets for a year. One of 8 of these that they are planning to build, and this goes hand in hand with the very large investment in renewable energies that China has been working on with solar and wind power as well. So, well, at least someone is leading the fight, I guess. And now,
it came from outer space.
Chinese satellite has beaten a distance record for quantum entanglement. Now, without getting too deep into the weeds of the details, quantum entanglement is being researched as a method for communication because it is possible to basically make messages and information uncrackable. The encryption from quantum entanglement, basically, you can't break that. An attempt to break that actually destroys the entanglement, and then the message would be lost and you can't read it. Pairs of entangled photons have been transmitted some distance on Earth, but now with a satellite that they've launched, they were able to transmit quantum entangled particles 1,200 kilometers, and that is a new record. Actually, I think the total is like 2,400 because it was transmitted from a ground station to the satellite and back to another ground station. So that's pretty remarkable. theoretically, there is no limit to the distance particles can be entangled, but in practical senses, we've not been able to entangle them for very far. But now, with the ability to do this to a satellite, that really opens up some practical communication uses for this technology. So there you go. More news from China. Quantum entanglement of photons, possibly opening new ways of having secure communications over long distances. And that is the news of the moment. On the main segment this week, a look into the main non-carbon, non-nuclear, renewable electricity generation methods. Solar, wind, and water. These three methods of making energy are well known and have been with us for a long time, in some cases for centuries. All of these methods have pluses and minuses, and at current technology level, none can be the sole supplier of carbon-neutral energy. While solar, wind, and water are all renewable and not fossil fuels, they still have environmental impact. Unless we want to go back to the Stone Age, there is always a trade-off. All of these technologies continue to improve, however, and along with improving storage means, they will play a large role in our long-term power plan. Along with a base load delivered by nuclear energy, yeah, I'm still on that, base load for consistent, constant delivery, we are entirely capable of generating our electricity without using coal and natural gas. Several countries and towns have run their power for a day entirely on renewables, but there will still be a need for a base load that is available under any weather conditions. Another thing I want you to spend some time considering as we discuss the various ways we can make electricity: when was the last time you were without power? Can you imagine going without it for a whole day, a week? It's something that, at least for the most of us in the United States, we never really think about. The common solar panel is a familiar sight to most. Even when I was a kid, there were small solar panels on calculators, and some people had solar water heating units on their rooftops, and these heating units actually date back to the 1920s. Over the past 10 years or so, the cost has come down dramatically, so that we are seeing solar electric generation, both in large solar farms and on rooftops, become much more common. In addition to the panel types that are photoelectric, that is directly creating electricity from sunlight, there are systems that use mirrors to focus light, heat salt into a liquid state, and then boil water to drive a turbine. The photoelectric effect was discovered in 1839 by Alexander Becquerel. In the 1950s, Bell Labs first produced solar cells for space use with about 6% efficiency, and the efficiency is how much of the sunlight energy is converted to electricity. All the numbers I give here in this show are for unfocused or unconcentrated light, just as it is outside on any given day. Also in the 1950s, Hoffman Electrics and others developed commercial use cells with 2% efficiency. At the time, this meant $1,785 per watt. So you can see the importance of efficiency on the economic side. Use in spacecraft made more sense for a long time, easier to implement than other fuel sources, and solar exposure unfettered by the atmosphere and weather. By the mid-1980s, cells of 20% efficiency had been developed, and at this level, the cost first begins to be competitive with other methods of making energy. In 2011, Chinese mass production pushed the cost down to $1.25 per watt. And in 2016, Australian researchers hit 34.5% efficiency without light concentration, but with a more complex design which is probably too expensive to widely use right now. We all hear a lot about solar these days, and it will be a growing alternative to fossil fuels. However, it is not without limits. The sun doesn't always shine, and its usefulness can depend greatly on where you are. When I lived in Denver, I had a solar system on my roof, and sometimes the meter ran backwards in the summer. However, now I live in Oregon, and though panels would do some good, there are far more cloudy days, and when the sun does shine, it's less intense due to my altitude and latitude. So maybe a giant solar farm in a place like Arizona makes sense. But if it can produce a surplus of electricity, getting that here to Oregon is complicated. The energy market is a tangled web, the grid is sometimes sketchy, and even in Arizona, the sun doesn't always shine. And we need to ask, what is the environmental impact of covering 100 acres of land with a solar farm? How polluting is the manufacturing process? And keep that in mind for any electric generation technology. Solar is great, but like pretty much everything, there is a trade-off. Greater efficiency will help, but there is also an upper limit to that efficiency. In the future, the best use of solar, I imagine, is by having panels integrated into everything. Solar roofing, solar windows, and car roofs already exist. My house has already made its environmental impact by being built. There are plenty of rooftops, so I would like to see solar on every single roof. It may not supply all of our power, but it would make a significant impact. Wind power also has a long history, being used for pumping water and milling grain. Modern wind turbines come in a variety of designs. The horizontal design is familiar to most, with turbines in large and small sizes. Vertical access designs are also possible, but these are a little less efficient and subject to more structural stress at large sizes. The U.S. does currently generate a lot of wind power, with Iowa at the top with 36.6% of its energy needs produced from wind in 2016. That's impressive, but I've been to Iowa many times. There are turbines everywhere, and that is a consideration that can't be ignored. Modern wind turbines for electricity generation are a common sight in many parts of the United States, and though they can also supply some power, they do have their drawbacks. By one estimate, it would take 3,540 wind farms, as large as the well-known one offshore in Denmark, to replace every coal plant in the United States. That would be something in the neighborhood of 250,000 turbines. Offshore wind farms are often a better option, as the wind over the ocean can be more consistent. While it would be possible to build that many turbines, there is also a large NIMBY problem to deal with. Not in my backyard. People have often opposed wind farms and other things because they don't want to have to look at them. Build them, just not here. And the wind doesn't always blow. And sometimes it blows too much. Yes, indeed, if the wind is too fast, the turbines have to be locked down, or they risk breaking apart or catching fire. I think that wind and solar together can supplement each other and together provide a large portion of our power needs. But to replace all fossil fuels with wind simply isn't possible unless we are willing to live with large turbines on every horizon. I can see the vertical designs for wind turbines becoming more common. These often look like art sculptures, and I think they could be implemented with less opposition from the public. And I think smaller designs can, like solar, be placed everywhere to supplement power as much as possible. Small home turbines, roof placements, and even along the edges of tall buildings, as cities always seem to be windy, could be economical, but again likely won't produce a ton of power that will replace everything that we already use. I think we could foster the mindset that we should do what we can to draw less power from the grid. Take the mindset that instead of making all of our power with one thing, just draw less of it at your house. Small-scale wind could help, and like having solar on every roof, why not have a small turbine or two at every home? Hydroelectric power is also not new, but is worth considering its current use and its possible future. There could be designs for plants at both large and small scales that can supplement our power needs, perhaps without the disruptive dams that we are familiar with. And for ease of understanding the types of hydro technologies, I'm just going to give you this information from hydropower.org website. There are 4 broad hydropower typologies. Run-of-river hydropower, a facility that channels flowing water from a river through a canal or penstock to spin a turbine. Typically, run-of-river project will have little or no storage facility. Run-of-river provides a continuous supply of electricity, a base load, with some flexibility of operation for daily fluctuations in demand through water flow that is regulated by the facility. Storage hydropower, typically a large system that uses a dam to store water in a reservoir. Electricity is produced by releasing water from the reservoir through a turbine which activates a generator. Storage hydropower provides a base load as well as the ability to be shut down and started up on short notice according to the demands of the system for peak load. It can also offer enough storage capacity to operate independently of the hydrological inflow for many weeks or even months. That is, if things get very dry, your river might dry up, but the big lake behind the dam will be there for quite some time. Pumped storage hydropower. This provides a peak load supply, harnessing water which is cycled between a lower and upper reservoir by pumps which use surplus energy from the system at times of low demand. When electricity demand is high, water is released back to the lower reservoir through turbines. So this means that water is flowing into the system through the turbines, generating some electricity. Not all the electricity is being used during low demand, so they use some of it to run a pump that pumps water up to something that is at a higher elevation. It could be a tower, or it could be placed on a hill up from the facility or something like that. Then when there is more demand for electricity, they release that water out of that system back through and just use gravity to feed it down through the turbines. And lastly, offshore hydropower, a less established but growing group of technologies that use tidal currents or the power of waves to generate electricity from seawater. I'm not sure why they say seawater here, other than tides and waves are only big enough on the sea to do this. This doesn't have anything to do with the water being salty or anything like that. Anyway, hydro, unlike the others, can potentially offer a base load of power. River flows and lake sizes are usually reasonably consistent, so are tidal forces, although wave action might not be, depending on how it's used in the technology. Hydro plants can also be quick start to ramp up quickly during peak power demand times just by redirecting water flow when needed. But like the others, it has an environmental impact. Building a large dam will create a lake. That might be good, because water will probably be an even more important resource in the future, and we may want more reservoirs. But not that long ago, the Chinese were heavily criticized for relocating people and flooding archaeological sites with the Three Gorges Dam. A river-run system will likely have less impact, but would produce somewhat less power. Small dams might have less impact, but again offer less power. Of all these methods, large dams are the only ones that produce on the levels of coal and nuclear plants. The offshore tidal generators are an interesting technology, but again, what is the impact? What is the trade-off for having 100 tidal turbines just offshore? Will there be NIMBY opposition similar to that for other renewable options? And of course, there are places where there simply is not enough flowing water to make this work, and though potentially a pumped system might work better. And I feel like I have repeated this over and over, and I will say it again. Hydro will be one of several solutions that we have to employ. A multitude of options, not just one thing to take care of all the problems. Next week, we get to some less conventional methods for making electricity. Though some are perhaps less practical than others, these methods nonetheless can play a role depending on the location and the circumstances. I will also give a brief view of the questions of storage, the grid, and the general efficiency of our use of electricity. Stay tuned. All right, that's your show for the week. Thank you, as always. Thank you for joining me here on this Saturday or whatever day it is when you happen to listen to the show. Thank you for toting me around in your MP3 player or putting me on your computer. Come to the website, panfuture.org. You can send me a message from there, find the Twitter feed, do all that kind of stuff. Send a donation if you feel like supporting the show, or another great way to support the show is write a review, especially on iTunes. If you get your podcast through iTunes, please do write a review. It would certainly help out the show a great deal. I would appreciate it immensely. And I will talk to you again in the future.